Welcome to the Connected Conversation with Brett Hill, a well-known mindfulness and somatic coach and coach trainer, as he demonstrates the power of mindful communication to change your life, work, and the world. Disconnected is the new normal. People are feeling overdriven, overwhelmed, and disconnected from meaningful conversations. But it doesn't have to be that way. Step into a life that works for you. Flourish and give voice to your natural creativity and purpose as you learn how to connect deeply and authentically with yourself, others, and the world. The Connected Conversation with Brett Hill starts now.
Hello, this is Brett, and welcome to the Connected Conversation. I am a mindful somatic coach and coach trainer. I founded the Mindful Coach Association, which you can find at mindfulcoachassociation.com, because if you're a coach or a mindful professional who is interested in collaborating, connecting, and being in the great mix of your colleagues who are also interested in those things, then you can join us for free. We meet every week, actually, and have a great time. So that's the mindfulcoachassociation.com. And I also teach coaches how to do mindful somatic work, because I have a specialty in mindful communications, and that is what this show is about. Today, I want to talk about something that's been on my mind lately, and I'm going to call it curating your experience. Curating your experience. And what I mean by that is we kind of just go along in our day and aren't generally very in tune or attuned to the impact of what's it like to live in a culture that is just so noisy. And I mean by that, if we have every single day thousands and thousands of people trying to get your attention, it's almost like we're just completely bombarded with messages that are doing the very best that they can to grab your attention and keep it for 10 seconds, long enough to deliver a message to you. This is the entire organization of social media and attention grabbing headlines that are just so over the top. They all have, very, very powerful language that's designed to hook you in. It's designed to cause you to go, oh, well, and in fact, like if I'm writing a blog post, they have AI now for, blog headlines that will rank how catchy your headline is. And it'll tell you things like, well, you need like a power word, destroy, or, own, or, captivate, or, surprising. You have to find some word that is going to emotionally connect with people and use it in a headline. Now, that's okay. You think, oh, yeah, of course. But there's a consequence to that. And that's what we don't think about very much. Is the consequence from the guy who's writing the article is, oh, you want people to see the article. But think about it in the context of the readers, and then think about the readers in the context of the culture. Here we are in a situation where our everyday experiences, yeah, I'm one guy writing one headline, but in the course of a day, I might see literally 500 or 600 different posts where people are trying to grab your attention with these power phrases and these power words. So it starts to be a little kind of, don't you think it's a little over the top a lot of times, you're reading these headlines and they're like, you can totally own everything in your life if you'll only take this pill, or if you'll own, oh my God, I didn't know what life was until I broke through to super, 7 figures, 30 minutes without doing anything at all except laying on the beach. If only I would pay this guy $20,000 to take his mastermind class. It's like really, really intense, and it's nonstop. So, this is just the world that we live in. It's like it's everywhere all the time, and you just have to just literally listen to the words in a commercial and see what I mean and how over the top they are and how emotionally laden they are. They're that way on purpose. There's a thing these days called neuromarketing. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you might want to look that up. Neuromarketing. Neuromarketing is, well, let's call it a science, a social/science in a way, about how to connect with people in a way to get their attention and convince them to buy products and services. They're making big strides in neuromarketing, and there are things that go on in neuromarketing that are under the cover, meaning you don't know that they're quote unquote manipulating your behavior, but they are. And so they're really looking at what goes on under the hood with people's decision-making processes. And it turns out there's a lot there that we don't know about. Now, the way that you begin to kind of be more conscious about these things is to first know that that is so, to know that there are changes, things that people can do that make a difference in the way that people behave. And the people who are having these modifications in their behavior aren't aware of those things. So let me give you an example. There's a famous study by, I don't know the name or who did the study, but you can find it by looking it up in under certain keywords like, eyes on the cookie jar, eyes on the coffee can. Look up a study like that. So what this is in an office, they have a place where you can contribute to the funding the coffee machine, right? Every time you get a cup of coffee, you're supposed to put a buck in the can. And so, people aren't participating very fully. So they did some tests. This was actual research from a university rather than just some, an experiment among office workers. But rather what they did is they said, well, what happens if you take cut out a pair of eyes from a magazine, like you find a model or some picture where you just cut out a strip and it's just the eyes and not the face, but just the eyes, or maybe even an illustration of eyes, and you paste it on the can so that there's the coffee can sitting there, it's got these eyes on it. Well, what happens remarkably is that people start to put in more money because it is clear and obvious that they're not real eyes. Nothing has really changed at all, except that there are now these eyes pasted on the coffee can, taped to the coffee can. That does something to people. They look, they see the eyes, and they're reminded, oh, I should be doing this. And somehow it feels like they should do it. The need to do it, the thing that whatever circuit causes you to grab that buck and put it in the can, is more likely to be activated when those eyes are on the can than not. Now, if you poll those same people, they'll probably tell you that didn't make any difference to them. But it does. And there are lots of examples of this kind of thing. There are lots of ways to demonstrate that we are influenced by things that we are not aware that we're influenced by. And I'm saying all that to make the point that every single thing that you say or see or hear or touch or feel, everything has to be processed by your nervous system, right? So it's like there's this saying, you can close your eyes, but you can't close your ears, right? You don't have ear lids, so to speak, right? So the point being that you can only disconnect from your senses to a certain degree. Your hearing is something that goes on all the time. You're always going to hear whatever's going around you. And that means your nervous system has to have a way to filter out the stuff that it doesn't need to be paying attention to. If every single sound you heard, you were like, what's that? I don't know what that is. I need to check that out. If every single sound you heard was like that, you'd be dysfunctional. Oh, that car goes by. What's that? I said, oh, I think it's a car. Let's go investigate. You're not sure. If that was the case, you would have to, be in a different world, because you couldn't manage in the world that we're in. But our nervous systems aren't like that. What happens instead is the sounds that are normal and expected are literally do not even rise to the level of awareness unless you mention them. It's like someone said, did you notice the street noise? Yeah, I can hear that. Yeah, I am noticing it now, but until you said that, I wasn't paying attention to it. So it's like, it's the nervous system, its job is to filter out what you don't need. Now that takes work. In a very noisy environment, that's a lot of work. Now, consider that your brain only has a certain amount of resources available. It doesn't have unlimited capacity. It burns a lot of fuel. It's like one of the most fuel consuming organs in the body. So the question then is, if all of your energy or a big chunk of your energy that's available to you is spent in filtering out the noise, what's left for the important stuff? What's left for, deciding, am I going to buy, a car? Am I going to say yes to this job? Am I going to quit my job? What do I say to this person that's yelling at me? The important stuff. Well, there's less energy, literally physical energy available for the consideration of choices in a conscious way. These are what we call the executive functions in the brain. When a whole lot of your available resources are being spent on simply getting to a place where you can pay attention to what's going on, because you're in a world of chaos. We're living in a world of not let's just call it structured chaos, right? And it's not just white noise like a car going by. It's people trying to grab your attention constantly trying to get your attention. There's an impact on that. You wind up deadening, in a way, you're by design, right? Your nervous system winds up by design going, well, let's don't pay attention to 100,000 things so I can pay attention to a few. So this leads obviously to a consideration about, well, what happens to you if you aren't in these noisy contexts? What happens to you if you start to change up your experience in a way that, you're not having to be so noisy, or you're not having to do all this work to filter out all the noise? Well, some remarkable things begin to happen whenever you do that. And that's where we begin to talk about curating your experience. But the first part of curating experience is knowing that you need to. It's like coming into a somatic, mindful awareness of what it is like to live in a world that is so frenzied, because these days we actually live in kind of a frenzied state, and we stay that way almost all the time. And this is what Gabriel Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, is all about. It's kind of like, because everybody's doing it, it seems normal, but it's not normal. It's manufactured, and that has a tremendous impact on us all. And you'll talk some more about that after the break. Thank you. Hey, this is Brett Hill with the Connected Conversation, and we're talking today around a fancy term, curating your experience. And this is important, really, really super important. I'll give you an example of the way I curated my experience. I was on LinkedIn. I post there a lot about the Mindful Coach method, the Mindful Coach community that I run, the Mindful Coach Association. And I was getting all this stuff because I used to be in the technical world. And so I worked for Microsoft, some other, companies doing some pretty deeply technical stuff. And I spoke on conferences all around the world because I had a cool job called a technical evangelist. It was really fun, and flying all around the place, speaking on stages everywhere. And, so a lot of my connections were all technical. And then occasionally I would start to get, other kind of more sideways stuff, like, political stuff or in the feed. And after a while, the feed started to be pretty I didn't really like my own feed, and I was just like, wait, what's up with that? And so I started just literally, blocking and removing connections and saying no to certain kinds of things and disconnecting from the sources of inputs into my connections from feeds that were, kind of like throwing a bunch of noise, as from the previous segment, talk about noise, into my stream of suggested content. And the result of that is that it's actually much nicer, calmer, more supportive, gracious place to be, because now I have posts that coming to me that are all very positive, that are all very, here's how we can be better people. Here's how we can help. Now, a lot of it is, it's an interesting change in tonality, but it's still the same sort of grab your attention sort of hooks that I was talking about earlier, but it has a softer impact. It's not so rough and rugged and hard to take in. So that was a case of me curating my experience on social media. And I would suggest you spend some time around that and kind of, look at what isn't serving you there and take some actions to improve it. You can really take that pretty far and wind up with a pretty rich context in some ways that connects you with people that are encouraging you to be more of who you really are. So, personal growth and connectivity, rather than telling you things like you need to, that you're not enough unless you do X, or if you only had the superpower that you can get from this, webinar or this person, then your life isn't complete without this. Now, those kinds of messages, the reason that they're not good for people generally is because what they wind up doing is that they tell you that you're incomplete. They tell you that you need something outside of you to be more whole. And that's the entire foundation for a system that wants to sell you more stuff. The nature of our market economy is that if you don't need things, you aren't going to buy. And if you don't buy, the wheels of commerce kind of come to a halt. Now, there's obviously things we need, right? We need physical things. We need healthcare. We need we need shelter. We need to collaborate and connect. We need the things that make humanity, a life worth living. But what else do you need besides the things that make a life worth living? Do you need, the latest, style? Do you need the latest car? Do you need the latest, electronic object? Do you need the new iPhone? What is it that maybe you do, and I'm not saying it's wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying these things are wrong. I'm just saying we want to be conscious about the impact of the continuous pitch that without those things, your life is less than it could be. That's the buy-in. That's the thing. You just turn on a TV and watch some guy driving a Cadillac or some, hot new car, the new BMW or whatever, and look at how they paint those people. Obviously they're affluent and they're just so chill and they're just so in the flow of this elaborate imaginary lifestyle that you could potentially have if you only had the car that would turn you into having that life worth living that's greener, where the grass is greener on the other side. But the truth of the matter is that when you actually get a car like that, it doesn't change who you are. It changes what you have, but it doesn't change who you are. And that's, quote unquote, the big lie. You don't inherit this fabulous life because of the objects that you have. Now, I want to roll that back a little bit and say, yeah, if you don't have a house and you have a house, that changes your life in the direction of more fabulous than it was because of an object. So there is a foundational level that I'm not talking about. In that case, yes, we have certain physical needs that we need. And Lord knows we need to not diminish the impact of that or diminish the suffering that comes from those who don't have enough. That's a different level than the stuff I'm talking about. I'm talking about, it's kind of a privileged place to be, in the sense of, oh, if I had these other objects, I would be even more elegant and desirable and powerful in the world. Versus, gee, if I just had enough food, I could actually make it to the next day. Very, very different considerations, right? In that case, yes, by all means, you want to be focusing on how to obtain and meet your needs. And it breaks my heart that in this culture, there's a lot more of that going on than there should be, because there's plenty of stuff. We have way more stuff in the country and the world than people need to have. There's more stuff. It's just not in the right place, right? So it's like all maldistributed in a way. Now, all this comes back to learning to pay attention to what is your experience now, listening to, sensing into what is going on for you when you hear all these pitches. And in the last segment, I said, what happens when you take yourself out of a world where all this stuff is going on and all this noise is happening? Well, some very interesting stuff happens. This is sort of like learning to be mindful in the beginning. One of the things that happens when people start to learn to be mindful, there's a practice in mindfulness training where you just stop, take a breath, and you focus on your breathing. And you just do that for, 10, 15, 20, maybe 40 minutes sometimes, depending on where you're at. But just even the beginning is just 5 minutes, beginning, when you just stop, and the assignment is just notice your breathing, just notice your breathing. And that's really the only job, just to notice your breathing, right? And it's not like, oh my God, I have to notice my breathing at all costs. And if I don't, then I'm not doing it right. It's not that. It's more, okay, because what's going to happen is you're going to notice your breathing, and then you're not. You're going to be thinking about something, because what's happening is that the brain is conditioned to be working in a certain way. It's like, you can think of it like a big wheel, like a big, giant tractor tire rolling down the road, like one that's like 15 feet tall, like a big one, or like a caveman stone wheel from like a Flintstones car or something rolling on. It has a lot of momentum, right? And just because it rolls down, and then you get to a flat place. So the flat place is, let's say, now I'm stopping all my inputs. I'm just going to pay attention to what's actually going on inside of my head, inside of my heart, inside of my mind. What happens is you have all this momentum going, and suddenly you start to notice, oh, I'm having a bazillion thoughts. I'm having a lot of activity going on. And so it's kind of unpleasant, right? The first time you begin to notice, oh man, there's just a ton of stuff going on here, because the brain is still acting as if it's in this chaotic world, and it's really, really overdriving. Now, what happens is that feels uncomfortable. And so people often just stop. They go, oh, I can't do mindfulness because it's just, I can't do it. Well, the Buddhists have a term for this. They call it monkey mind. And it's like, it's like popcorn. It's like going off all the place. The difference being that if you're being mindful, you notice that popcorn thing, the monkey mind, and you just keep coming back to your breath. You just keep coming back. And then pretty soon you begin to notice, oh yeah, I'm having all these thoughts. I'm having this experience of an overactive mind. Really, really big difference there, you see, because in one case, you're following your thought and you're in it. Oh, yeah, I really need to think about that sprinkler system or that car or that job or that date or that meal. I've got to figure that out and figure this out and organize and plan. And I'm really into it and it's important. Oh, wait, I'm supposed to be focusing on my breath. Okay, come back to your breath. But what happens is that there's a judgment starts to come in and says, I'm no good at this. I can't do this. This just doesn't work for me. Now, that is the first hurdle. You have to persevere if you're going to get to the next stage. Because if you just give up in frustration, you go back to what we call in the trade the default mode network. The default mode network is that wheel running all by itself down the road. Yeah, that works fine. I mean, it works fine for a lot of people. You can go through your whole life, though. But if you want to have a life where you're actually present for it and you're actually showing up in a way that makes your life profoundly more enriching and enlivening and creates a foundation from which you can move into the world more effectively. And I'm going to use this word authoritatively. And I don't mean that like having power over another. I'm talking about having your own, embodying your own authenticity, the power that comes from that, the authority that comes from that. You ever meet somebody who's like just real? I mean, they're just really real. They're not pretentious. There's a lot of authority in that. It's like you don't question their character where they speak so much because you know they're being real. They might not be right, but they're being real. You know, and there's a lot of authority that comes from that. What I call your embodied authority. It's something I teach. This whole practice is something I teach people to do in the Mindful Coach method. So the point here is that the beginnings of learning to curate your experience start with the awareness of your experience. You have to be able to be present to what's happening to you in a way where you're able to actually then make a choice about what to do that may be a different choice. And now we're making more intelligent choices that are informed by your experience rather than just whatever happens to be top of mind. And that's the way the default mode network works. It's like whatever comes next, we're just going to do. We'll talk some more about this after the break. Good conversation. I'm your host, Brett Hill, and we are talking about curating your experience. And by that, I mean paying attention to what is the impact of all the stuff that's going on in your world at any particular moment, meaning the impact of, reading 10,000 posts on Facebook or listening to 100 commercials on television, reading so many text messages. What is the impact of all of that on us? And how do we go about creating a scenario, creating a situation where we're able to, first of all, recognize and know the impact of that and make some adjustments if you want to. So what's the problem, right? And the problem I said is that in the earlier segments is that so much noise in our systems, because it's not just social media or the things we consume that way. It's like literally the auditory and visual world that we're in is just so insanely busy. If you live in a city particularly, it's like just visually, there's way too much to sort out. It can be overwhelming. You can go into any grocery store, go into any department store, and just look around the aisles and see thousands of brands with logos and pitches and colors and things to remember. And it's if you just stand there objectively and look around and go, wow, how many decisions do I have to make to get through this store? There's a lot. Because one of the things you might think about, if you're going to buy a can of soup, you might think, oh, I only have one decision. But really, if there's 50 different kinds of cans, you're making 49 decisions to not buy these other things. And you don't have to go through them one at a time. But the point is, there is a process whereby your brain goes from, this is the one that I want. And that process is largely unconscious until you get to the part where you go, oh, here's the one that I want. And then that's the one that jumps out at you and you go, oh, yeah, it's either from a memory or sometimes you go in, yeah, that's the one. There's no decision involved. But when you don't know and you're trying to make a choice, there's a selection process that's complicated. And like I said before, a lot of it is underwater. You don't really know what's going on. I'll give you an example. Um, there was some research that showed, this is really interesting, that if you when they had electrodes hooked up to the brain electrodes and an electroencephalogram, so you could see the EEGs of the brain activity, as well as the skeletal muscular system hooked up, so that you could see whatever nerves are being activated, muscles are being activated. And then they would tell someone to make, at some point or another, to decide to raise their arm. And what they found was, and then also to push a button before, when they realized that they'd made the decision, and then raise their arm. And what they found was that the arm musculature recruited to start raising before the person was aware that they'd made the decision. It's like the body level stuff happens first, and it happens at a level in our neurology where you're not conscious of it. And so if you ask someone, did that happen, they'll go, no. But did it actually happen? Well, you can show that it does, that you make the decisions that actually, in some ways, the idea that you chose something is the last thing to happen in the process of choosing. And yet it's the only thing we think is involved in the process. So it can be very, very disconcerting when you realize that that's just the way that our brains work. It's not a defect. It's not like, well, I'm not like that, because 99% of the people in the world would say, well, I'm not like that. But that's not what the science shows. So once you get your head around the fact that decision making is often an illusion, that those decisions are kind of pre-wired in, then you begin to realize, oh my goodness, I'm running on automatic most of the time, and I don't even know it. That's what they call the default mode network. It's like you're not really making choices, but it's the illusion of choice. So that begs the question, how do you actually have choice? How can you actually insert a space of having choice? Well, that's where the practice of mindfulness comes in, as I was saying before. First things first, you have to take yourself out of the noise long enough to realize that it's noisy, that there's a lot going on there. You have to be able to bear witness to your experience in a way where you can just simply name the truth of it. Naming the truth of your experience. Oh yeah, that's going on. I'm extremely nervous. I'm extremely tense. I'm noticing all this tension. That is an experience that I'm having. There's another refinement in the language. Rather than I am tense, you say, I'm experiencing that. That's happening. There's a part of me that's tense. There's a really powerful semantic distinction there. When you say, I am tense, it's like, I, Brett Hill, at the core of my being, am a tense person. Versus, oh yeah, I'm a person and I'm having tension. So now I've created a little bit of differentiation between the tension and my identity. My tension and my identity. It's not the same. When I use the language, I am experiencing this versus I am that. Small but really important distinctions. And this is stuff that I do with my coaching clients as I help them use this new language to create a separation between identity and experience, to create a separation between identity and experience. That is a huge, huge thing. Massive difference in the way you walk through the world when you realize that the things that are happening to you are not you. That you, and this is going a little farther even, you are not your story. You are something more foundational than that. How do you begin to get in touch with this? What does it mean? Paying attention to your experience non-judgmentally and in the moment. The practice begins with simply noticing your physical, emotional experience as calmly and as non-judgmentally as you can, just closing your eyes or getting still, taking a breath, turning your attention inside, and giving it time to settle. I think about it like a snow globe. You've seen a snow globe, you shake them all up, and when like if it's really dense, you can't see anything in there, right? And so if you were just to walk into the center of your head and look around and go, what's the world like in here? It's like a crazy snow globe. And you look around, you go, oh my God, there's a blizzard in here. I got to get out of here. But if you just take a seat and you breathe, it settles, and soon you begin to see this amazing scene, which was obscured by all the noise, by all the static, by all the snow in the snow globe. Another way I think about this, or I talk about this, is eye of the hurricane sort of scenario. And I love this analogy because there's such a great parallel to our actual neurology. When you are in your life, oftentimes it's like, oh, I'm being buffeted by the winds. There's like all this stuff. There goes the lawn chair. There goes the car. There goes the street sign flying by. It's just so much stuff going on, and we're just barely able to manage, right? We're in the outer rim of the hurricane where all the winds are blowing crazily and the trees are, being uprooted. And it's chaos, right? It's just chaos. And so that's the experience a lot of people have. The world is just chaotic and we're just trying to get through the day. Now, in the eye of the hurricane, it's not like that at all. There's all this, it's still a hurricane. There's still winds all around, but not in the eye of the hurricane. Instead, in the eye of the hurricane, it's very calm and very still. And that's the way our brains are. In the eye of yourself, in the center of your being, it's all very calm and very still. And all the stuff that's happening in your life is the stuff that's happening in your life. It's not you. It's just the stuff in your life. And sometimes the stuff in your life is pretty hard, but it's still not you. And sometimes it's pretty great, and it's still not you. And this is why you have people who become exceptionally wealthy and exceptionally successful, and they're miserable because those things are not them. And this is also why you have people who have really horrible things happen to them. They lose their arms and their legs. They get in prison and they get tortured, and they're still good people because those things are not them. That's a huge difference. And when you walk through the world in that way, then it changes everything. Suddenly, you're not as susceptible to all of this messaging, right? Because you're defining your experience because you're walking in the truth of your own being rather than looking for something that's going to complete you or being jangleable. Let's say you get jangled by all these messages. You become a lot less jangleable. You become a lot less vulnerable and accessible in some ways to the people that are trying to grab your attention so that you can make choices about what you ought to pay attention to. And those choices are real choices. We'll talk some more about that when we come back from the break. Hello, and welcome back to the Connected Conversation. I'm your host, Brett Hill. And we are talking about curating your experience today. Wow, such a huge topic, and it makes such a big difference. So when you are learning to be more present with your experience through the practices I was talking about, is paying attention. And starts with just literally closing your eyes or pulling yourself away for a walk, paying attention to your experience in the moment. Whatever that is, very, very gracefully and easily and gently and kindly to yourself. This is the beginnings of waking up to your somatic life, your somatic aliveness. And by the word somatic, I mean your embodied awareness. So, for example, here's an exercise you can do Unless you're driving or somewhere where you have to be paying attention, you can just take your hands and you can just rub them together and just pay really, really close attention to the feeling of one hand on the other. You're not trying to make heat. You're not trying to create energy. You're just sensing the feeling of one palm, one hand touching the other. And then maybe take a fingertip, and you rub it along the ridges of your palm and your other fingers very slowly, very, very slowly, slower than you think. And then noticing with a really refined awareness, what's that like? What can you feel? Any bumps or the ridges of your fingers, the heat that's coming off your fingers and your hand, any little imperfections that might be there. What do you notice as you do that? Now, if you are actually following along with this, and there's a little spot on the palm of my hand where it gets really ticklish. It's fun. Now, as you're doing this, are you thinking about your taxes? Are you thinking about what's wrong in your life? Thinking about what you're worried about? The next big thing, or what you were doing? If you're actually doing this, no, you're not, because you're paying attention to your in the moment somatic experience. So that's a really simple and very clear experience. Excuse me, your in the moment somatic experience. Now, there's no judgment about it. It's not like, oh, this is good or this is bad or this or that means this and this means that. You might have some thoughts like that, but just simply feeling the palm of your hand, feeling your fingers on your hands touching each other. There's no story about that. It's very simple and very direct. A lot of our experience is like that, but we just don't notice it. If you walk into a house from the outside, you are having a somatic experience of walking from the outside to the inside. But we've just done it a million times. Remember, I said first in the show, our brain removes signals that we're accustomed to as unimportant. But what if you did this as an exercise? Excuse me. You stand outside, you notice what's it like to be outside, and then you walk inside and you notice what's it like to be inside. There is a difference. You are experiencing a difference. It's just that most of the time that just flies under the radar. You don't even notice. And an even bigger experience is to go the other way around. You come from a place where you have a roof over your head and you go into outside. Suddenly, it's nothing between you and outer space but miles and miles and miles of air. It's unbounded. That's a huge, huge difference in our somatic experience. But we just walk through it as if there wasn't. So a practice I have is to do that. It's like I walk outside and I notice, what's it feel like to be outside? What's it feel like to have the sun on my face? What's it feel like to have the water drape over you in a shower? What's it feel like to hold a hot coffee cup in your hand? Suddenly, the world is a much richer place because I'm having all these experiences that I was having before. I just didn't notice them. You see, in this way, you find ways to connect to small, rich moments in your life that are uncomplicated, that add value, if you will, if you want to use a marketing term, add value to your life. And they're not dependent on anybody else. It doesn't matter if I'm going bankrupt or if I just had a breakup or if I'm, in a bad situation somehow or somebody yelled at me. I mean, those things do matter, yes, but my point is that those experiences are not dependent on anything outside of me. Whether or not I enjoy the sun on my face is up to me. I get to choose. The problem is we don't slow down enough to realize that there's a choice there. Instead, we're just obsessed with the momentum of our thoughts, the momentum of our plowing through our extremely complicated, overly chaotic worlds. And we don't, quote unquote, stop to smell the roses. It's really as simple as that. So if you want to have a better life, if you want to be more powerful, because when you are more grounded in your experience of now, when you engage in a conversation, here we are talking now about the connected conversation, then I can connect to other people in the same way I can connect to the experience of my palms rubbing together, or the a warm coffee cup, or the sun on my face. I can connect to other people similarly. Now, obviously, you don't want to connect to toxic people, but when there's warmth and when there's something pleasurable there, and there is in a lot of people, even simple, small things can be really enjoyable. Those things add a lot to your life, and they create opportunities to go deeper with people in the moment much faster. It's something I teach in the Mindful Coach method to help coaches learn to do that with clients, and then to help their clients learn to do that with other people. So this is the way to connect to these moments in your life where you can really have a much richer life, and it's really all up to you. You just have to decide, I'm going to make an effort, because it takes some effort. You have to make an effort to connect to this more internal space of your experience in a way where you can stay connected to that and also to the world. So it's not about going, being a monk on a mountaintop and sitting there for an hour, for a lifetime, or 10 years or 5 years, and disconnecting from the world. It's the opposite of that. It's disconnecting from the chaos of the whirlwind of the hurricane and standing in the center of it and going, yep, there's a hurricane here. I'm not going to be in the whirlwind of it, but there's a hurricane and there's a lot of chaos, and we can sort it out. But how much better are you going to be at that when you're in the center versus when you're out in the fringes? Sometimes you have to go to the fringes because that's where the work is. But when you do that, you take your center with you. And that's the power. Have you ever talked to somebody who's really grounded and connected and coming from a mindful place? You can just feel the center in them. I call it gravity. You can feel the gravity. That's what you can do. And you can do that for yourself with these kinds of practices. And this is why I'm passionate about mindful communications and the connected conversation, because truly, truly, if you practice this, it will change your life in ways that you can only imagine right now. But once you experience them, you'll go, oh my goodness, I can't believe how much better things are. And this is where the real urgency is. It changes your life, but it changes other people too. Because like I said, whenever you encounter someone who's got that gravity, that changes you. And then you become a force for change in the world. And that's what we need more than anything else right now. We need people who can own the truth of their experience, speak from that truth, and act in a way that's informed by their actual direct experience. That's how we change the world. That's how we connect with each other in ways that are meaningful and take effective action. That's the power of curating your experience and the power of the connected conversation. If you enjoyed this, check out themindfulcoach.com. You can also, if you're a coach, the Mindful Coach Method, or join the Mindful Coach Association if you're a coach or a trainer. And I hope to see you at one of those meetings. Thank you now. Bye.
Thank you for joining us today on The Connected Conversation with Brett Hill on TransformationTalkRadio.com. Tune in next time to experience the power of mindful communication to bring deeper meaning to your life, work, and the world. Brett is here to help you step into a life that works for you, to help you flourish and give voice to your natural creativity and purpose. See you here next time on The Connected Conversation to learn how to enjoy the experience of your moment-to-moment life. For more information, visit theconnectedconversation.com.